Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Under the Hood with AWS Compute, the show that takes you behind the scenes to understand how AWS services and solutions drive great outcomes everywhere from media and entertainment to technology. I'm your host, Lorenzo Winfrey, Senior Specialist, Festival Compute, and my co-host today is Nick Betts, Program Manager, Launch Marketing. Our guest today is really special, Mike North, NFL VP of Broadcast Planning. Now, the NFL just recently launched the 2023-2024 NFL schedule, and Mike and his colleagues are part of a very special group of people who are in charge of getting the NFL schedule just right. Though I'll admit that's a bit of an oversimplification, as you'll learn during this episode. Good afternoon, Mike. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm super excited. Normally, we ask the chat to tell us where they're watching us from, but in honor of Mike joining us from the NFL, we also got to expand that again and say, put your favorite team in the chat. Exactly. Let us know your favorite team and where you're watching from, so we can get things going.
Who's your team, Lorenzo?
I'm a Falcons fan. I'm a Georgia boy, born and raised. Rise up, go Falcons. How about you, Nick?
I can now publicly state again that I'm a Broncos fan. I'm hoping this year goes a little bit better for us, but we'll see. I'm sure Mike is a fan of all 32 teams.
I root for all 32 equally. I want everybody in the league 8-8 going into the final weekend of the year. That'll be fun with the playoff permutations for that weekend. But look, that's the way this league is built, right? We want everybody competitive, and we have a salary cap. We have the reverse draft order, make it really hard to keep a dynasty intact. The Falcons were good not that long ago. I remember, the Michael Vick years and the Jamal Anderson years. And the Broncos, we're not that far removed from, Super Bowls. So it's all cyclical. Everybody's going to come back. The challenge for us is trying to predict and figure out who's coming when. And, better to be a year too early than a year too late.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the things I think makes the NFL just so compelling, is that the way you guys have balanced it from the schedule and the draft perspective. The teams that kind of struggle the most get the help, they get better, right? And then the whole thing kind of shifts around again, which I think makes it so compelling, and it really brings home that whole any given Sunday.
Yeah, it's 100% true. The challenge, look, it's a great thing for a fan, obviously, not knowing who's going to be good, who's going to be competitive, who's going to win the Super Bowl. It's a hard thing for the scheduling team, because obviously, the schedule makers, we like dynasties. We like things you can count on. We like sure things. So if we knew right now everybody's records and which games were going to be the best ones, we put those teams, we put those players in the national television windows. Here we are in May. That schedule's been out a couple of weeks already. Season doesn't even start for 3 more months. Can't wait for it to get started. And then once it does, boom, all your best laid plans right off the cliff. Here's teams you thought were going to be good, like your Broncos last year, Nick. They killed us with all those primetime appearances. So maybe we hedge a little bit on the Broncos this year. Watch, they're going to get out to 5-2, and they're going to be right there, and they're going to challenge Mahomes all the way to the end. And we're going to wish we put more Broncos games on television. You just don't know in this league. That's both the good and the bad thing about it.
I'm going to knock on wood. If somebody can quick make a clip of that one section and send it to me, I appreciate it. Yeah. But, I think that's what we're so excited to talk to you about today, is all those different variables that go into making that schedule, especially like you said, we release it months before the actual season starts.
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is it would be great if we could wait a little while longer to release it. There's still things that we're all trying to figure out about who's going to play and who's going to be healthy, and, what free agents are still out there that are going to get signed. There's some big names that are still out there that are probably going to end up in training camp rosters. So, schedule maker in me would love to wait till, September to put the schedule out. But obviously fans need to make plans. The teams need to make plans, the charters, the hotels, the halftime singer. There's a lot of people that are waiting for that schedule. So we actually put it out a little later now than we used to, frankly, in large part to the help that we've gotten from you guys. In the old days, we would build that thing by hand, one game at a time, 1 week at a time. By the time mid-April rolled around, we just kind of said this was the best we could probably do. It took us 10 weeks to get here. We don't have another 10 weeks. So let's put this thing out and get everybody going. As the computing hardware and software has caught up to what we all had in our minds of what we could do someday, now every extra day that we have to grind and search, and, the algorithm, the heuristics, the hardware, the software, the optimizers. I mean, I wish we had another month. I'm sure there's another schedule out there. Is it better? I don't know, define better. Is it different? Yeah, probably. But we're probably like vanilla and chocolate at this point. It's all ice cream. It's all delicious. At some point, let's just put one out there. Let's everybody start making their plans, and then let's get that ball in the air and let's start playing.
Nice. I love it. Love it. The audience is going nuts. I see we got some Jets fans, Ravens, Rise Up. I see you, Falcons, Maryland, Zimbabwe, Lions, Brazil, Kenya. We got a global show. Everybody turned out today for you, Mike. So
we're a global sport now. It's incredible. Playing games in England and Germany. We're probably going to be back in Mexico again next year. They're talking about places like Spain and Brazil. There's a lot going on in Africa right now. I'm not sure we're going to play a game there anytime soon. Yeah, it's a global game. It really is. And you can tell, like you said, you can hear the fans from everywhere, and they can find us so much more easily than they used to be able to. Like you said, it's real time, right? And we're getting real time feedback from our fans every day, not just internationally, but everywhere, right? Every time they turn on the television, every time they follow somebody on social media, every time they download a video on NFL.com, every time they put a player on their fantasy team or buy a hat or a jersey or place a legal bet, like every time a fan interacts with us, they're telling us what's important to them. So the scheduling team trying to take in all that data, take in all that information, and then feed back out to them the games that they most want to see.
I love it. Love it. It reminds me so much of here at AWS, the whole customer obsession, right? You're talking about listening to the fans and trying your best to give them what they're looking for. I love it. I love it. So might as well kind of kick this thing off. But before we get kind of like too far into the details about the schedule, I read somewhere that you were a computer science major, and you said that when you graduated, you realized that you didn't really want to do anything with computers.
How it was a different world back then. I'm an old man. You young guys, you grew up with these computers. I'm an old man. When I went to college, computer programming, computer science meant sitting in a cubicle somewhere and slogging away writing code in languages like COBOL and Fortran, which don't even exist anymore. And we had, I'm old enough to remember like the 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, even punch cards. I mean, it's come a very long way in a very short time. But yes, I was a computer science major. I maybe wasn't the single best coder in the history of Washington University in St. Louis. And I was just so maniacally, passionately interested in sports. And there really hadn't become that bridge between those two sort of industries yet. This notion of, Moneyball and the data and the analytics and the predictive and the search and the optimization, those things were all still years away. We were just barely scratching the surface of, the internet and the World Wide Web back in the early 90s. So I was really, really lucky. I had a computer background, but wasn't good enough to go get a job writing in COBOL and Fortran. But when I started sniffing around the sports industry, that computer science degree did carry a little bit of cachet, and it made people wonder, hey, someday, could somebody with a little bit more of an analytical approach be an asset to the company someday? So I was very lucky to get my foot in the door, got there at just the right moment when the folks who were by then, like we said, making the schedule by hand, we're just beginning to think about, hey, could we automate this process someday? Could we take all the things that are in all of our heads and put it into a computer program somewhere? And if you could hit a button and do in 10 seconds or 10 minutes what it took us 10 weeks, you could do it over and over and over again. You could iterate a lot more. You could look at a lot more options. You could be a lot smarter, and you could feel even better about the end product. Everybody's still going to hate it. We know that. When the schedule comes out, everybody hates their schedule. We know it. But hopefully for valid reasons, and hopefully fewer and fewer every year.
Schedule's inherently biased against everybody's team.
Of course. Yeah.
That's right. That's why I find it. As I was looking at the interview and listening to it, I thought it was super ironic that now you're using some of the most advanced scheduling technology in existence to generate the lead schedule. You just can't get away from tech.
No, look, going the other way. I mean, we're running towards it. I mean, for a long time, and your point is valid, actually. When you were building it by hand, and the humans who had done this for 30 years, the guy who taught me how to make NFL schedules, a fellow named Val Pinchbeck. He is the godfather of NFL scheduling. The miracle, honestly, isn't that we do it, 50,000 schedules a year, with the hardware and the software. The miracle is he ever did one by hand, and he really kind of did it in his head. He almost just kind of closed his eyes like Beautiful Mind style, and he saw all the logos, and he just kind of did it in his head. It was a miracle to watch, but he was a human being, and you're never going to be, as optimal as you want to be if you're doing it by hand, and you're never going to see as much of the solution space as you want to see if you're only building, one schedule over every 10-week cycle. So we do what he did now, thousands of times a night, and just constantly seeking more data, quite honestly. Like we said, it's almost like a one-to-one fan experience right now. Every fan out there tells us what they care about, what they're interested in, and, majority rules for the most part. There's a reason that the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs and the Green Bay Packers are on television every week. Those are the teams that our fans want to see. But when the up-and-coming storylines begin to emerge, fans gravitate to them quickly. You can break through really quickly now in a way that you couldn't in the old days because of things like social media. If you think about a guy like Patrick Mahomes now, I'm sure this is hard for you, Nick, as the Broncos fan in the room, but when Mahomes showed up, he was doing like Michael Jordan type stuff. And, when Jordan was doing it, you had to wait until Sports Center at 11 o'clock at night to see the highlight, or you had to wait till tomorrow morning and read the USA Today or read the box score. Now you're seeing Mahomes in real time on your Twitter feed within seconds of these things happening, and you're finding a whole new way to cultivate this fanhood. So that's why teams like the Chiefs are able to kind of break through now. And when they become everybody's favorite team, we've got to react to that, and we've got to make sure there's more Chiefs games on television.
Yeah,
absolutely. So kind of digging into that, I was watching where I did a lot, did my research on you, and you talked about this year's schedule being really unique in that it would be the first time that every game was a free agent. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and how it impacted the schedule creation process this year?
Yeah, this goes back 50 years. This goes back to the late 60s, early 70s, when the NFL was still kind of in its infancy in terms of growth and a national fan base. And at that time, the home games weren't even on television. If you wanted to watch the Washington Redskins in Washington, D.C., you had to buy a ticket. And there was a fear back then, 50 years ago. Nobody knew anything, of course. We don't know what's going to happen 50 years from now. But there was a fear that if you put the games on television for free, then people would never go to the stadium. And you have to differentiate the stadium experience from the couch experience. And that's something that the NFL and its teams work on all the time. But back then, you didn't even have the home games on. So you bought a ticket to go watch the home games, and then you saw the road games on television. So the visiting team used to determine the television network, whether it was NBC or CBS. There wasn't a Fox back then, but once Fox got in, the visiting team used to determine, because that was how you followed your team when they went on the road. So for all those years, the visiting team determined the television network, which means every game only had a few homes. They had multiple homes. You could always go to Sunday night or Monday night as we built out our primetime suite of offerings. But the visiting team determined the television network. And so when the scheduled team wanted to take a game and put it on Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football, you were literally taking it away from CBS or NBC or Fox, whoever the Sunday afternoon partner was. And so there were limits in the contracts. How many times could you take each team away? How many total takeaways could you have? How many takeaways from one network or the other could NBC or ESPN get? There were all these rules around where these games could be deployed. So in the latest round of media deals, Hans Schroeder and the team that led the negotiating on our side kind of went to the networks and said, I think that's probably a product of a bygone era. It was 50 years ago. All games are on television now. Shouldn't matter who's home or away. You want to watch a Washington game, you'll watch a Washington game, whether they're home or away. And if they're not on Fox or CBS or NBC or ESPN, you'll find them. Again, we talk about real time, whether it's Twitter or other ways to communicate with our fans. There's nobody who on a Sunday at 1 o'clock should not know where that Washington game is. Yeah. You can find it. We can help you. Call me. I'll tell you where it is. So getting rid of the restrictions as far as which games could go where did a couple of things for us. One, as you guys can imagine, is particularly given your skill set, it took an already essentially infinite solution space, and it didn't just double it or triple it. Yeah, it exponentially increased it. So the solve time it took us to get through a cycle each night used to be 12 to 14, maybe 18 hours if we were patient. Now you're talking more like 24, 28, 32 hours. So the humans had to be a little bit more patient, waiting for the search to get through more of the search space because there were so many different options that it didn't used to have to explore. The good news was that as you went down those nodes of the search tree, you were finding more options. You used to run into dead ends all the time because, oh, nope, I can't finish week 9, or there's no way to put a Monday night game into week 15. Now it's just, oh, well, hey, this Baltimore-Cincy game could go anywhere. A good example is the Cincinnati-Kansas City game this year. We've been talking about this a lot. Bengals-Chiefs this year could have been Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, CBS doubleheader, Fox doubleheader. Could have been played at kickoff in week 1. Could have been played in Germany in week 10. just for that one game, we had 7 potential homes for it across all those different weeks. So the number of options gets really big, really quick. Multiply that by 272, and you realize how big the solution space can get.
With that, specific example, just to kind of get our heads around like how this has changed it. Before all that happened, you said there's 7 possible scenarios now. What was it before? Was it just 1 or 2?
Really, it only would have been probably 3. It would have been Cincy KC, 2 AFC teams. So that game belongs to CBS.
Okay.
And if you want to take that game away, quote unquote, take it away from CBS, you could take it to NBC or you could take it to ESPN. But again, a limit to the number of times you could take each of those teams away and how many times NBC can take from CBS or ESPN could take from CBS. So there were some guardrails. There still are. I mean, most of the Chiefs games are still on CBS. Most of the Cowboys games are still on Fox. But it added a lot of flexibility for us, which, like we said, created some challenges, but really hopefully helped us land with a better solution.
Does that also mean like we all love those flex games, right? Where the underdog in week 1 is suddenly the hot team in week 16 and they get flexed into a primetime spot. Does that open up the door for that to happen more?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Knowing every game was a toss-up. I mean, yes, we schedule it now. It's May 30th, so the schedule's been out a couple weeks. Every game at least has a home, but there's still mechanisms built into this year's schedule. To your point, if we didn't put enough of your Broncos on primetime this year because we put too many on last year, by the time you get to week 16 or 17, if they're still in this thing and you got that Broncos-Chiefs game and it's going to decide the division, we're not doing our fans, we're not doing anybody any favors if that game gets played, at noon Central Time in Kansas City with 8 other games going on, and maybe only 18 to 20% of the country are going to get to watch, a game that could decide the division. So at that point, yeah, some trapdoors, some levers, some bells and whistles. Maybe you move it into a primetime slot or even into a national television slot on Sunday afternoon. Games are getting played Thursdays, Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays. We'll find homes for the games that matter.
So we've kind of been circling it a little bit. You've been talking a lot about how it used to be and obviously how AWS and the cloud has really expanded the potential for all of these different games. So 10 to 15 years ago, you talked with us about how the schedule release day was really not an awesome experience.
That was a duck and cover day.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more, like a little bit about how that used to go, and then kind of moving forward from there, what it means, your perspective on how the technology has enabled the NFL to grow in that area and to make it a lot more awesome nowadays?
Yeah, look, 10, 15 years ago, before, before the software and the hardware caught up with our dreams, with our vision of what we could do someday, like I said, we were building that schedule by hand, one game at a time, and the solution space is still massive. It was 256 games back then, but still it was gigantic. And so the way we did it was you kind of put the key television games up first, a Sunday night game, a Monday night game, a doubleheader game. And you did that for every week of the year. So there was like 50 or 60 games kind of hanging out on the big board. And they were in every week of the year. And then you tried to solve around those. So those were the television games. You solved around the television games. You start at the top, you build week 1 through week 6 or so. And then you kind of go down to the bottom and you build up week 17, 16, 15, get through the holidays, maybe get up to Thanksgiving. And then you kind of have this open, call it 4 or 5 week stretch between weeks 8 and 12, somewhere in there. And at that point, you're just hoping everything sticks. What do we have to do to finish this puzzle? So weeks 8 through 12 were terrible. They were terrible. They were 3-game road trips. They were bad Sunday afternoon windows. There were road after road Mondays. And you couldn't even begin to account for things that we try to think about now. Things like, where's your bye week relative to your Thursday? And how many rest days do you have relative to your opponent this week or the next week? And who's traveling west and who's traveling east? And we weren't even playing international games back then. So now you've got to think about where you are the week before your international game, the week after your international game. And so when you were building the schedule by hand, it took a solid 10 weeks. You would get one schedule done. It was flawed, but it was a finished NFL jigsaw puzzle. It was legal. It was feasible. The company was going to stay in business. The schedule team was going to keep their jobs, but we knew it wasn't as good as we could do. Mm-hmm. So we slowly started to incorporate some automation into the process. And if you could teach the computer all the things that Val Pinchbeck and the rest of the scheduling team were thinking about, the computer could process that so much faster than we could. And it could aim higher when it was steering, as opposed to us. You're making a decision up here in week 4 and you hang that Baltimore Cincinnati tag up there. You have no idea that you now doomed, the Carolina Panthers to a 3-game road trip in week 14. How do these two things correlate? Yeah. We didn't know, but the computer does, and the search does. So, using all of that now technology helps us make better decisions as we're navigating this road. And then, like we said earlier, you're not just finishing one schedule and handing it to commissioner and saying, hey, sorry, we're done. It's the best we could do. You're seeing new schedules, 10, 12, 20 every single day. Mm-hmm. And so what you can do is you can iterate. You could say, you know what? We should never do that again. Stop the computers, write a new rule. Don't ever do that. And you know what? We hadn't really thought about this, but I love that right there. Maybe we should kind of make that a little stickier and don't let it float around to all those other places it could go. Maybe that's a really good home for it. So why don't we take a day or a cluster or a subset of our resources and just kind of grind on that game in that week, but don't ever do that over there. Go again. All night, all day, every day, over and over. You keep feeding the software more and more rules. You're shrinking the solution, but you're guiding the search towards something that you think is going to be better at the end.
Yeah, that's super cool. Like all the factors y'all are able to take into account is just mind-boggling to me. And you talk about the length of time that it takes. I think you've said it takes about 10 weeks to create the schedule. Is that still correct?
Look, when we were doing it by hand, that's what it took just to get one done. Now, I mean, look, the truth is they're preliminary, but we're kicking out, finished 272 game jigsaw puzzles by March 1st. I mean, if the commissioner ever came downstairs and banged on the door and said, hey, I just talked to the president and we have to put a schedule out today, we'll have one. It won't be our best, but we'll have one and it'll be legal and it'll be playable. But every day we get to look at a contender. Every day we get to throw contenders at the leader, really, right? There's always one best so far. There's always one schedule that everybody likes better than anything we've seen so far, whether it's March 1st or April 1st or May 1st. There's always one best so far. You hang it on the wall. You say, that's our North Star. That's our leader. What would we fix about it if we could? Well, that 3-game road trip or that little stretch for that team, or they play too many playoff teams in a row, or they're not going to like going there before they have to go to London. Let's try to switch that. There's always something that you want to try to fix. So run all the computers tonight, trying to fix the warts in the leader. You come in tomorrow, 8 or 10 or 20 contenders, and now you throw each of those contenders up against the leader in the clubhouse. Soup to nuts, right to left, top to bottom, team by team, network by network. Is this better? If it is, new leader in the clubhouse. What's the worst thing about it? Let's try to beat it. If it's not, leader survives. When that leader survives a couple of days or a couple of weeks, you're converging on optimal and you're probably getting as close as you're going to get to the best so far.
Gotcha. So it's kind of, you guys, iterate on a bunch of ones, find one that you think is really, really good, and then tinker with it with different variables until you find one that's as close to perfect as you can get.
Yeah. And to your question earlier, when you're like, what's different now that every game's a jump ball? In the old days, when you got down near the end and you were just throwing contenders at the leader, they all kind of looked the same. I mean, at that point, you'd kind of painted yourself into a corner. You had already taken away all you were going to take away from CBS and Fox and NBC. So that schedule might be the best we could do. If we're going to change it, it's going to be on the margins. It's just going to be something relatively minor, not to the team that got the fix. It's a major to them, but to us from 10,000 feet, those two schedules, those last 20 schedules, they all kind of look the same. Now they all look very different. And so it's good and bad. You see a lot more branches of the search tree. You see a lot more options, but that makes it harder to compare when you get down near the end, because like we said, it's vanilla and chocolate. The last two schedules that literally when we had to pick one to present to the commissioner, the last two schedules had different games for kickoff week, had different games for Thanksgiving, had different games for Christmas. It's hard to compare when they're wildly different, even at that stage in the process, all the way near the end.
Gotcha. So it's just so many different options to choose from.
We learned a lot this year. I'm sure we'll learn a lot more next year.
That's super cool. Is there anything with, because of the flexibility it allows you to have, right? You get that North Star and then a late breaking change happens with like the draft or certain players. And just that day, within like 2 hours, you can get another iteration, work off of that. Like, are there any major, alterations or earth shattering, Peyton Manning signing with the Broncos, which was the greatest day of my life, that like just completely makes you start over, right? Or how quickly would that change the landscape of your schedule?
Yeah, we're lucky now that we can kind of start over if we have to. The way we write the rules, the way we feed the constraints into our model, we kind of group them. And so we know if something happens, exactly where to go in the groupings and say, these are the rules you need to change. So we're always thinking about what might happen. We got lucky this year, whether it was Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson, some of the question marks kind of got taken off the board right before the draft. So we were fortunate that we were able to continue to stay on the path that we'd already set out for ourselves as we were thinking about Aaron Rodgers being a Jet, or might Lamar not be the quarterback of the Ravens? And if not, where's he going to go? You referenced Peyton Manning. I remember building schedules that year, and we were literally watching on NFL Network as Peyton Manning's private jet landed in Miami. All right, well, what if he goes to the Dolphins? Would we do this and this? And then it landed in Nashville. Well, what would we do if he's a Titan? And it landed in San Francisco. It's like, ooh, the Niners, that would be interesting. I mean, he landed in Denver, and you'll remember, Denver was already a playoff team, right? They were coming off the Tebow year. So at that point in our schedule, we had already had plenty of Denver Broncos on national television. When Peyton Manning landed there, maybe they picked up one or two more, but at that point, everybody was still all in on Tebow. So changing the Broncos from a 8 or 9 national appearance team to a 9 or 10 national appearance team wasn't really heavy lifting for the scheduling team. Maybe a better example was when Tom Brady left the Patriots just a couple of years ago and went down to Tampa, because Tampa wasn't a team that we were really thinking about a whole lot of national television exposure for. But when Tom Brady lands there, suddenly those are the games everybody wants to see. So that was a major change. And to your question, what do? We stop everything, turn off the computers, everybody take a breath. Let's go take a look at that leader in the clubhouse that's now no longer the leader, pull it off the wall, and let's talk about it. Because each of those 272, back then it was 256, but each of those games is now worth a little something different because the details have changed, right? Tom Brady is now the quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Each of those 16 Tampa Bay Buccaneers games are now worth a little bit more than maybe they were when you were placing them in the first place. So we can react much later in the process. Part of the reason we're going to do the schedule release like we're doing now after draft is because it buys us a couple of weeks just in case anything crazy happens on draft day. And look, some of the rookie quarterbacks getting drafted at the top by the teams that finished, there's a reason they were drafting near the top of the draft, right? They're probably not teams that were heading for a lot of television anyway. There weren't that many surprises, I don't think, relative to where some of the big names landed. And I don't think we had to change too much. But if a big name quarterback or a big name star player had changed teams on draft day, we're going to want to be able to react to that.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're getting a bunch of questions. That whole answer generated so much from the audience here. We're getting stuff. How long does it take to iterate when you make those changes? Or, what's the average number of revisions you have for a season? What is it? 10 minutes? Is it 1,000 different schedules? How many are you guys looking at?
If we're gonna be doing this right, we probably have to give each schedule about an hour. You really have to look at it as though you're the general manager or coach of each of the 32 teams. Like, how is coach going to react to this? We know how coach is going to react to this. He's going to hate it. I mean, we could give him all home games and all Sunday 1 o'clock starts and he's still going to hate it. But we try to look at every schedule as though we're the coach and general manager of each of the 32 teams. And then as though we are the president of each of the television networks. We try to put our hat on as though we're the head of the health and safety department, as though we're head of the international group, trying to think about everybody's reaction. And you said it earlier, Nick, you're not going to please everybody. That's okay. But what you do want to understand is why. And you do want to hear from everybody, and you want to really kind of focus on what are your priorities. So when we talk to the teams or we talk to the networks, it's not give us a list of 50 things that you're looking for, because we're never going to be able to deliver on all those. But what are the 3 big things that really matter to you? Team or network or head of player health and safety? Tell us the 3 big things that matter, and let's set a target for ourselves and let's try to deliver on those. And if we missed a little bit last year, then maybe you kind of tune the dials a little bit more this year and make sure that you lean a little bit more towards solving for them, or they got way too much of what they needed last year. Maybe they're going to get a little bit less. And so it's a constant tinkering with those dials. The computers run all night. With any luck, they kick out a dozen schedules every night, each one of which is a legitimate contender and should all have their day in the sun and their day in court to go up against that leader in the clubhouse. So if you can give everyone, 45 minutes to an hour, You can learn something from every single one of these schedules. And then you're going to take that feedback and you're going to say, okay, here's something we're not going to do anymore moving forward. Here's something we love that we should probably try to keep in any schedule moving forward. Here's something we're willing to live with. It's not critical, but it's acceptable. Here's something we'd hate. We would do it if we had to. If everything else was great, if this was the worst thing about it, we'd live with it, but we really don't want to. So you just kind of try to tune those dials and change the values. Everything right now, at least, is still a negative-based scoring system. So instead of looking at everything that's right about a schedule, we're just constantly looking at everything that's wrong. And so every time you break a rule, you take on that penalty value. And if we think that rule is really important, we'll make the penalty value $1 million. And if we think it's something that we'd like to avoid if we can, but it's not mission critical, maybe the penalty value is 50. And so break as few rules as you can, total up all the penalty values. That's the score of this schedule. The lower the score, presumably the better the schedule. But you can't really be sure until you actually do that sanity check and go through it, every single one, over and over and over again. Take the feedback, take what you learned, debate it amongst your peers, maybe go up to the commissioner's office, give him a little knock and say, hey, we saw something, just curious to take your take on it. He's not shy. He'll tell us if he agrees or disagrees. And then you kind of give that feedback back to the automation process overnight. You put it back in the software and you let the search go tonight. Now it's searching smarter. Now it knows a little bit more about what it is we're looking for and what they think, what the humans think is right or wrong about this schedule or that schedule or this path or that path. So I'm going to be a little bit smarter about my search. The first thing I'm going to do is lock in that game that I know the guy likes. He really likes that game and he really likes it that week. I'm going to go make sure we can get a schedule with that one there. And then I'm going to go figure out, okay, I will remove that game from that spot that they really liked it in, but only if it solves 2 or 3 other problems. And again, that's no consolation to the Broncos if they catch the 1 3-game road trip. But if that 3-game road trip saved 4 others, that's probably a better schedule for the NFL. And the only way to do that is to tell the computer over and over every night what the value of each 3-game road trip is, of each road after road Monday, of each early bye, of each road game before a London game, of each time you have to play a division opponent 2 weeks apart. All the things that we're trying to avoid, they all bring penalties with them when they can't. If we're tuning our penalties right and the search is working, the lower the score, the better the schedule.
That's awesome. And we start talking about running out of simulations nightly, right? Pumping out those 12 or so schedules every night. That kind of leads me into my next question, something a little bit more technical, but it is one of my favorite topics, and that is EC2 Spot. Can you talk a little bit about how Spot has enabled, I think, some seriously massive scale to power those nightly schedule simulations while also enabling the NFL to save roughly $2 million a year?
Yeah, no question. It's a game changer. There's really no other way to talk about it. Before we even get to Spot, we got to talk about cloud, because that's really where this all started for us. I don't want to say old enough. I'm experienced enough to remember when we were running these, simulations. We were running these models on individual desktop servers that we had to either buy or rent or lease each year. And I remember the year we went from like 4 computers to 12, and everybody said, you're crazy. You don't need, first of all, you're never going to be able to manage 12 computers. How are you going to keep track of what's on each one? Second of all, you don't need 12 computers. You only need a few. Just make a couple schedules, pick one, you'll be fine. When we got to 12 computers, it was a circus, man. They were all in one room and they had these great big fans on them, and they were so loud that we were all talking over them the whole time. And they kept burning out because we were running them literally 24/7 with the CPU pinned to 100 every night. The fans would die, the computer would crash. Our IT guys would come up with a screwdriver and pull out the fan on the back, put in a new one, get it going again. Good, because we got to figure out if Cowboys-Packers fits in week 7. Put it on that computer, go. And we did that all day, every day on physical machines that literally sat in a room with us, and they needed to be cooled, and they needed to be powered, and they needed to be patched, and they needed operating systems. Finally, the next year, we put them down in the data center where at least it was air conditioned. But that was impractical. We couldn't, buy computers that were obsolete 2 weeks after we bought them, and we couldn't just keep leasing them over and over again. We needed a better solution. And when cloud came along, we were the perfect candidate. We needed every computer we could put our hands on. We needed them 24/7, but we only needed them for those 10 weeks. So we were the perfect cloud computing candidates, and we were really on the bleeding edge. We were really on the front edge, kind of taking some early lumps as we all tried to figure out how this was going to work. but we realized real quick that it was going to work really, really well for us. And what Spot allowed us to do when you guys enabled this was, instead of us having to commit to this many machines at this price every night, and that's your budget and you're done, Spot was able to say, tell you what, we can actually get you 2 or 3 times as much hardware for sometimes maybe half the price. And now all of a sudden, we had so many more resources available to us, whether we put all those computers into one cluster and just continually figured out whether Cowboys Packers could fit in week 7 or not, or you partition all those resources and you put them into 8 or 10 different clusters. And on this cluster, you put Packers Cowboys in week 7, but on this cluster, it's in week 9. And on this cluster, it's in week 3. And on this cluster, it's in week 1. On this cluster, it's not even a Sunday night football game. It's a Monday night game. And hey, you know what? Why don't we look at it on Thanksgiving? You now have all these other options, and there was enough resources, enough power behind each of those clusters because of Spot that we could really do a deep dive down every one of those rabbit holes. So we got a lot smarter, a lot quicker when we got that feedback within sometimes, 18 hours. Hey, Packers Cowboys in week 5, dead end. Do not go there. Absolutely not. Good to know. Rather know that now than spend weeks manually trying to build a schedule around Cowboys Packers in week 5. So what we did with Spot this year, which was even better, was we built a way to replicate the cluster size as we lost instances to other Spot customers. They were just instantly replenished. And so your guys helped us really figure out a way to say, oh, well, hold on. Before you take computer number 7,822 away from the NFL, take a second, take a snapshot. Where is it? What is it working on? Because it might be working on the best seed that Mike could probably have found for it. If you just take it away and it dies, you may never finish that solve. Stop it. Take a picture, take a snapshot. Okay, now you can take that machine away. We're going to backfill it, and we're going to have it pick up right where it left off. So every night we were able to see so much more of the solution space. Did we find infinitely better schedules? I don't know. The Broncos and Falcons fans on this call may not agree, but we saw more options. And at the end of the day, that's all we're ever wanting to do. I'm not sure we see, 1/10 of 1% of the solution space each year, but let's make sure that if that's all we're seeing all of it. And we're really understanding what's down each of those rabbit holes. And so using Spot, having all those resources as a continued, bank where we always knew every night when we hit the button, we were going to come in tomorrow and we were going to see 10 or 12 contenders. That was night and day for us. It never used to be like that. Most nights you hit the button, you go to bed, you set an alarm at 3 a.m. and you come back and check them. Because if they're not making progress, you better give them something else to do, because 9 a.m. is going to be here soon and the boss is going to be waiting on his schedule. Now, I don't want to say I slept peacefully, but I slept. I knew that there were going to be schedules every morning when we woke up.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. I always, love to hear when, our capabilities enable our customers to do just all these kind of, amazing things. And when you talk about Spot, and, its interruptive nature, I love how you were able to work with the team to come up with a way. I always talk to customers about a Spot interruption doesn't necessarily mean a business operations interruption, right? So coming up with a solution to account for the potential of this variable occurring, and then figuring out how do we mitigate that to still go accomplish the thing that we want to go accomplish. So I love hearing this stuff. I love hearing.
And look, you guys are great, because not only obviously Spot, when it saves us the money and all that kind of stuff, but we also had the dedicated option. When we're tinkering in March, it's okay if you lose 10% of your Spot instances overnight. We're not going to play any of these schedules. These are reps. These are reps for us. These are reps for the solver. These are just us getting our feet underneath us and, kind of figure out where the bodies are buried. But when it gets to May, can't afford to lose spots, can't afford to lose instances. So at some point they actually helped us as we built a suite, some Spot, some dedicated, so that every night we knew this cluster was never going to be touched. That one might have a little bit of variability to it, but that's okay. We're going to backfill it. And it's been where we are now from where we were is incredible. I can't wait to see where we go next.
Love it. I know we only got you for a few more minutes, Mike.
I can go all day, man. What do you got?
Yeah, kind of building off what you're just saying with how much variability it gives you. I'm kind of curious. Can you tell us a little bit more about that partnership between how AWS helps the NFL really put that together, and also what are some of the lessons you've learned within that might be applicable to some of our customers listening right now in other industries?
Yeah, look, the best thing about the AWS relationship, at least for us, was the fact that there is always somebody from the AWS team, not just available, but like the opposite, like reaching out to us. It's not like they're sitting by the phone just waiting for an emergency. They're reaching out to us and saying, "Hey, we see that it's March 15th. Like, how you doing? How's the schedule? Can we see it?" No, you can't see it, but we can talk about it. And so they have spent an incredible amount of time and energy and resources, and really provided us with really some of the smartest people that I've gotten to speak to in the space over the last few years. And they've really learned our project. They really sat with us, really kind of almost like an embedded situation where they sat there just kind of fly on the wall and watched the process. Didn't say much those first couple of months, just kind of watched, felt a little self-conscious. I knew they were judging us, but they were learning, and they were recognizing where they could help us. And what really helped, strangely, the only time maybe somebody might say this, was when the pandemic hit and it forced everybody to go remote. And so then we were on, Zooms just like this, and we were building the schedule. So as opposed to having to fly somebody to New York and get them a hotel room and feed them and help them navigate the subway and get them in our little tiny room to watch and learn and listen with us, they could just kind of lurk on the Zoom. And there were many people from AWS that kind of listened in and just kind of lurked on some of our Zooms. And every now and then I would just keep my eye on the chat, and somebody would have something to be like, "Hey, have you guys ever thought of this?" Or, "Hey, you know what? We've got a product that can do that." Or "I heard you just say, hey, someday you want to do this. I know exactly who on my team can help you with that." So it's been a great experience for us, just from a customer service standpoint, the way the AWS folks have leaned in. Look, it's easy. It's football, right? There's a lot of football fans out there. Everybody wants to know how the sausage gets made. They also want to know who to blame when they're terrible schedule. But AWS has been great. Right? Yeah, well, now you know. But your team's been great. They really have. They've really leaned in, and they've done a couple of things, really two main things that has changed, if not the way we're doing it now, changed the way we're going to do it in the future. One of them has to do with when we talk about the spot instances and we talk about lining up all these servers, do you want 5,000 smaller boxes, or do you want 2,000 bigger boxes? Mm-hmm. That's always a question, because the faster boxes, we could feed them less and it could still go and solve, right? We could tell it maybe not start on a blank piece of paper, because we know the solution space is infinite, but we'll put Dallas, Green Bay in week 7, like we talked about, and let's put Washington, Dallas on Thanksgiving. And like we said, Cincy, Kansas City's got a whole bunch of different homes, but at least for this path, why don't we try that game for kickoff and push that one onto this cluster? And then let's move those 3 or 4 games around and push that onto this cluster. The fewer games you have to give it, the more flexibility that you still have to be able to search through, but the longer it's going to take you to search through that. Are you better off putting more games into your subset, your seed schedule, and having more and more computers start with bigger seeds, or smaller seeds, fewer boxes, but faster boxes? And so your guys have been great about kind of really doing the metrics with us and trying to figure out where that sweet spot was. You put 80 or 100 games on the board, there may not be that many ways to finish that schedule, even though there's still 200 games to find a home for. Whereas if you put 60 games on the board, there might still be an infinite number of possible solutions, and we're never going to find those in 24 hours. So somewhere between 60 and 80 is the sweet spot. Which of the games you have to commit to right up front as part of your seed schedule, your primetime schedule, and then solve around those? And how many of those seed schedules can you build every night? Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? So which of the hardware options is best for our little problem? And should we adjust our little problem, our process, in order to take better advantage of the hardware? That's been probably one of the biggest changes. And then the one that's coming next year, when we do this next year, guys, I hope we're going to be able to tell this success story. We talk a lot about the negative-based scoring system. Here's everything that's wrong with an NFL schedule. What we're missing is everything that's right. And at the end of the day, that really does come down to viewership. How many of the big games can our fans see? We're not doing our job if we're putting the good games on Sunday afternoon and it's only available in 14% of the country. People are going to miss that Burrow-Mahomes game if we don't put it in a national window. So it is all about maximizing the value of each of these 272 assets. They're not my assets. They're not yours. They belong to the fans. So how do you deploy these 272 assets in a way that maximizes everybody's enjoyment, maximizes viewership, maximizes eyeballs? So we're working with the AWS team now to kind of turn this algorithm into more of a multi-objective algorithm. And instead of just, optimize, lower the score, now it's yes, lower the score of team, competitive inequities, but maximize the score of viewership opportunities. And somewhere between those two is where we're going to find our sweet spot next year. We could find that schedule that's going to just be perfect television, quote unquote, but it's probably not going to be our fairest team schedule. And the flip side of that is you can make that perfect team schedule. Everybody home, away, home, away. Nobody goes to Florida in September when it's 100. Nobody goes to Lambeau in January. Everybody's got a mid-season bye. Like, if you do all that for your clubs, your television's not going to be as good. So somewhere between those two balancing acts, that's where I'm really looking forward to this next iteration really of our software for AWS to kind of help us turn a singular objective algorithm into a multi-objective algorithm. This is going to be a really interesting Zoom next year, hopefully.
Yeah, can't wait for it.
Nice. So I see we got some comments in the chat. Bob Hafner asked, kind of, do you use any kind of automation to rule out, potential candidate schedules? I know you talked about that, right? There's like 28,000.
Yeah, I mean, literally every year we start from scratch. Every year we turn off every single rule. Every year we start from an absolute blank piece of paper, 272 matchups for the first time. And then, like we said, we start adding these guardrails. Where are the NBC games going to go? Where are the ESPN games going to go? Where are the Thursday night games going to go? Who's going to London? Who's going to Germany? Where are the stadium blocks? What rules did we break last year that we don't want to break this year? How are we going to change our process and maximize on or optimize on, different metrics than we used to? So every year we start from scratch, and every year we rewrite the rules one at a time, reminding ourselves this is why we're doing it, and is this still the right rule? And talking to our own internal folks, we've got still a lot of gut and feel and instinct. I don't ever want to lose that. That's part of this process. It's what makes Roger Goodell and Brian Rolap and Hans Schroeder and Howard Katz so good at what they do. Don't ever want to be dismissive of the human element for this, but the predictive analytics and the math and the science and all that has to play a role in here somewhere. So trying to work with our own internal analytics team, just trying to figure out, hey, what's the worst thing you could do to a team? Is it a 3-game road trip? Is it a road game in Florida in September? Is it going to Lambeau in week 18 for the third year in a row like Detroit had to do? Didn't seem to bother them last year. I mean, you never know, right? So you really want to look at every single one of these rules, every single one of these constraints, and figure out, is it still the right rule? Some of these are left over from Pinchbeck's days when he was doing them by hand. It's still basically the same process. It's just faster and it's smarter, and it can still be even better. So how long does it take? As long as they'll give us. But the metrics, the analytics, to answer the question, is there an automatic disqualifier? Yeah, like in any optimization program, if there's a rule that we refuse to break, you make it a 999 rule, and the software will just never break that rule. The optimizer will never put Dallas Green Bay in week 18 if we tell it it's a 999 rule not to put it there. So if the schedule finishes, if it's a full jigsaw puzzle and every game's got a home, we're going to want to go ahead and at least give it a cursory glance. Let's see what the score is. If it's a score of 9,000 and we've got a couple of 2,000s in our hand, you got to figure these 2,000s are better use of our time. But I peek at the 9,000s too. You can always learn something. Sometimes there's a rule in there that's broken and you're like, maybe that shouldn't be a rule. And sometimes there's a rule in there that you're like, oh man, I can't believe I only had that in there as a 100-point penalty. That would have ruined that 2,000. I should make that. Yeah. So we look at all of them. We'll do as much as we can, but there's no instant disqualifier.
Gotcha.
Excellent. So I know you always talk about this. There's every kind of major sport league, from like the pee-wees all the way to the pros, right? Everybody has to build a schedule. Do you is there a community for that, right?
Yeah, it's a strange little nerd community. My counterparts from Major League Baseball, from MLS, from the NBA, from the NHL, we all get together once every year or so, kind of a summit meeting, kind of a best practices. You get the 5 families together, you get them in the room. And look, to a certain extent, we're obviously competitors, but within our little worlds, we're all, trying to figure out those best practices. A rising tide lifts all boats. And if there's any work that I've done with, our software developers, whether it's Optimal Planning Solutions out of Western Canada or AWS or Garobi Optimization, I'm not shy at all about sharing those experiences, good and bad, with all of the other sports leagues. And we all kind of trust each other a little bit. We all want the same thing. And that is to find this magical, mythical, perfect scheduling software solution where you can just tell it everything you're thinking, and it could read your mind, and it could read Commissioner Goodell's mind, and it can remember things from 2 years ago or 20 years ago, and maybe more importantly, predict what's going to happen 4 months from now, 6 months from now, 10 months from now. So yeah, it's a strange little nerd community where we all get together and we all talk about stuff like this. We all root for each other. It's funny how, I pay more attention to things like, when you look at the NBA finals right here, they set their finals date, whatever it was, 10 days ago when Denver finished their sweep. If Miami had finished their sweep of Boston, they would have had a pretty long gap before the championships actually finally started, and just always wondering, was that the best way to do it? Is that the right thing for the fan? Is that the right thing for the arenas, for the players, for the television viewers? Every time it rains, I'm thinking about Chuck Torres over Major League Baseball. How's he going to reschedule that Mets game? Is it a doubleheader? Is it a day night? Is it a split doubleheader? Is he going to have to do it later at the end of the season in September, in October? Because when baseball gets too close to October, they start bumping into NFL dates. And now we start having to think about, well, hey, if you need the baseball stadium across the street at 1:00 and we've got a football game in our building at 8:00, can we get the traffic in and out? How are the police going to handle it? How's public transportation going to happen? So the answer is, yeah, we all work together. We're all rooting for each other to a certain extent. But the tools that are out there for us, whether it's things like Spot or the optimization guys or the APIs or the software developers, everybody that's out there, it's a small little group, a tight little fraternity, and we talk a lot.
Yeah, at least you don't have to worry about the comboed baseball football arenas anymore as much, right?
It's a whole nother thing. I mean, we thought, frankly, when we got done with, I think Oakland might have been the last one. When we got done, we thought we were done, but it's really not that simple, because in places like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Seattle, they really are like across the street from each other. And to be able to schedule both on the same day would be an incredible challenge. Can it be done? Probably. Is it the right thing for the fan? Is it the right thing for the city? Is it the right thing for the media coverage and the sponsors? Right? If you spend all that money as a season ticket holder for both and you got to choose, we're not doing right by you there, or sponsors or media coverage. And whether it's the baseball stadium across the street or a golf tournament or a NASCAR race or an MLS match, there's always something else going on. And so trying to figure out, like we said, when we're trying to create our optimal schedule would avoid all of those other sporting events in the market every given day. I'm not sure we're ever going to get there, but trying to prioritize which ones are truly impactful, like a baseball game right across the street, versus, another event somewhere else in the market where, yeah, they're 8 miles apart and fans will have to choose, but at least you could still pull off both events safely.
Gotcha.
Amazing. So like I said, I know we're coming down to our end of the time with you, Mike, but I did want to ask you just one more question, get your thoughts. So everybody here at AWS, we're really customer obsessed. And the thing that continues to make me smile every time I listen to you talk is your customer obsession, right? I'm just like super connected with it. Like I'm nerding out here a little bit, because that's what I hear in your voice. I hear the passion, I hear the customer obsession. And so, people a lot of times know we're customer obsessed, perhaps to a fault. I know a lot of my colleagues are watching. So can you close with your thoughts on how you see AWS helping to continue to evolve the schedule creation process, and what type of things, if any, have you wanted to do, but the technology just wasn't there that now you think just might be possible?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to kind of what I said before with our fans are telling us every day what's important to them, right? Every time they interact with us in whatever way, it's captured somewhere. You buy a hat or a jersey, we know, right? You watch something on television, we know. You place a bet, we know. You put a guy on your fantasy roster, we know. You're telling us every day what's important to you, and we should be able to interact with you in a way where we can then predict what you're going to care about next week or next month or in 4 months, if we knew which of these teams are going to be good 4 months from now. So the next step for us is really to continue. We got a guy in our shop named Paul Ballou who runs our data and analytics team, and he literally calls it the one-to-one. Can we really interact with 100 million fans every weekend and really have that one-to-one relationship with them? we all grew up being told, oh, don't read the internet comments, but you kind of have to read the internet comments sometimes. That's where you find what your fans really think. If they tell you you're an idiot and they could do the schedule on a cocktail napkin in 10 minutes, that's probably not somebody you need to interact with. But when they tell you that, hey, did you know this is the 4th time in the last 7 years that we've had to play the Cowboys coming off their bye week? Like, no, I didn't. Thank you for telling me. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I would love to know a little bit more about. So those things that are theoretically knowable, but might just be too much for any one human to kind of capture year after year after year. It's almost like we're crowdsourcing the rule set for our schedules now, and what really is important, and what really is fair, and what really is unfair, and what matters to a team's record. And maybe this team right here, is coming off a 3-win season, and so maybe nobody's expecting Super Bowl from them. But which games matter to them the most? And maybe it's not the games that they think they can win. Maybe it's those rivalry games. Like I go back to that Detroit Green Bay game again from last year. All those years that Detroit has always been on Thanksgiving, right? And everybody's like, oh, why is Detroit always on Thanksgiving? Because it's tradition, man. It's been 100 years. Like, name anything that's been happening for 100 years, right? So it's been 100 years of the Lions on Thanksgiving. There were a lot of years where really that was kind of the Lions' only national television exposure. But after last year, what they do? Started 1-6, and then they almost ran the table. They went into Lambeau for game 272, knocked out the Packers. They have played their way into more national television. So now you see them as the kickoff game. You see them on a Sunday night. You see them on a Monday night. What I'd love to be able to do someday is for you or somebody else at AWS or somebody somewhere to tell me, who is this year's Detroit Lions? Who's the team that maybe none of us see coming, but all the signs are there? And I don't even know what those signs are. Is it percentage of the salary cap devoted to position other than quarterback? Is it record as the final 6 weeks of the season? Is it strength of opponents? What is it that somebody somewhere can look at the 272 games for 2023 and tell us, who you guys need to be aware of? You need to be aware of the Carolina Panthers. And if that's the case, how do we want to deploy those 17 Carolina Panthers assets in a way so that we're capturing that moment at just the right time? Maybe it's the quarterback, maybe it's the wide receiver, maybe it's the defense, whatever it is, right when they begin to crack through that national consciousness and fans are talking about them and Twitter is blowing up and Stephen A. Smith is ranting, right then, that's when you need a Panthers game to be in a national television window. Could we ever someday be that predictive? Could we ever be that good to see that coming, or at least have some sense of who might be, next year's Detroit Lions? And who is this year's Detroit Lions? Like, we believe in the Lions this year. We believed in the Broncos last year, Nick.
I know.
We believe in the Lions this year. We believe in the Cowboys and the Chiefs. You can believe in the brands that you've counted on for all those years, but where's the predictive going to come where somebody's going to help us really get smart about, who you guys really need to pay attention to? Maybe it is the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe this kid under center with all those pieces around him, he doesn't need to be Patrick Mahomes. He really doesn't. But he needs to keep the train on the tracks. And, you think about a guy like Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh, where he started and everybody's like, oh, this guy's not the answer. And then 4 of their last 5. And now everybody's talking about, this is exactly what we need in Pittsburgh. We need a guy to don't turn the ball over and pick up 3rd and 6 and just keep the chains moving, right? You don't need to all find a Patrick Mahomes. I'm not sure there are other Mahomeses out there, but you need what's right for your team. And everybody can do it a little bit differently. And every general manager builds his roster differently. Where's the predictive analytics that tells us who's doing it right? And if so, can it project not just to next week or next month, but 4 months out, 6 months out? Can it project a year out? Can it project 2 years out? I mean, our scheduling rotation, we know 14 of the 17 opponents for next season. Should we already be thinking about what that 2024 schedule is going to look like? Those are the kind of things that I think we're dreaming about, things we never even could have thought possible 5 or 10 years ago. But frankly, where we are now, we never would have thought was possible not that long ago. So can't wait to see where it goes. Appreciative of the help that we get from the other sports leagues, from our friends at AWS, from everybody that we talk to, everybody that's interested. Somebody watching this right now on a live stream somewhere might end up shooting me an email and just saying, hey, I don't know if you're interested, but we've got this program that we use to schedule my daughter's softball league. And what if that's the magic bullet that works really well for the NFL? We kind of found our existing provider now, Optimal Planning Solutions out of Western Canada. The guy was doing the New Zealand Rugby League about 20 years ago. He cold called the NFL offices. They put him through to my voicemail. I'm like, whatever, random dude in Canada, leave me a message. And he left me a message and he said, I've got a heuristic. I think it might work for you guys. Turns out the New Zealand Rugby League is structured not that dissimilarly from ours. And he changed Sydney Swans into Chicago Bears. And he was able to help us with a heuristic that we're kind of still using today. We bolted on a much more powerful engine with all the AWS spot instances. I'm not sure it can handle going as fast as we're going now, but you never know where the next breakthrough is going to come from. And I can't wait to find it.
That's awesome.
Awesome, Mike. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know I'm looking at the comments from the audience. I think everybody super enjoyed it. I think it's, the convergence of sports and technology is always something that like gets me just, super excited. And, personally, I just can't wait to see what the NFL and AWS continue to do on this front. I'm with you. I think, the sky's the limit.
I tell you what, Atlanta, Denver, World Series. I'll get you guys 2 tickets. All right.
Oh,
somebody clip that.
Series. How about Super Bowl? Let's skip the World Series.
Holding you to that.
Appreciate it.
I'll see you guys in Vegas for the Super Bowl. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Take care, fellas. Have a good night.
You too. All right. Yo, that was great, everybody. Appreciate everybody hanging in with us. That was Mike North, the VP of Broadcast Planning for the NFL. And he was here today talking with us about how the NFL uses AWS Compute, including EC2 Spot, to build its season schedule. As you all can see, it is an amazing process. It takes tons and tons of compute, hours and hours, quadrillions of possibilities and simulations. So appreciate everybody kind of join us for that. In a second, we're going to spin out. Mike talked about kind of the compute that's behind that. Going to bring on some colleagues. We're going to dive a little bit deeper on Spot and Flex Compute. But before we do that, I want to hand it over to Nick to share some special information with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. And I want to thank everybody for kind of tuning in today. We've got some really exciting news regarding a new show on this channel. I tried to get an epic voiceover guy to do it for me. Apparently, that's grossly outside my budget, so I'm just going to have to do it myself. But basically, we're really excited to share with you all that starting next month, we'll be debuting a new show called AWS On Air Sports. The show is going to look a lot like this one. We're going to cover how the cloud is changing the sports world and look to answer questions that we've all had watching sports, right? Like, have you ever been watching an NFL game? We've all seen the that commercials. How exactly does that work, and how are they used, right? If you're watching all of the PGA Tour events this summer, how does that TourCast interactive viewing system work? How do Formula One teams make their decisions so quickly on the track in what is already the fastest sport in the world, right? Our new show, AWS On Air Sports, is going to answer those questions and so many more like them. We'll be bringing you exclusive interviews with industry experts, athletes, coaches, and fans from around all these different leagues, and explaining exactly how AWS is helping to revolutionize their sports. And don't worry if you're not an expert in cloud computing. I may have hidden it well, hopefully, but neither am I. So the show is going to focus on real life use cases that we see play out every day in the sports world on our favorite games and events. And you're going to be learning right along with me, like today, how these things work. We're going to be using demos to explain the basics behind how AWS is impacting these sports we all love. We're going to discover how cloud computing, data analytics, and machine learning are seamlessly integrated into the fabric of modern sports, and we really don't even realize it. Our show is going to be your ticket to behind the scenes actions for all of these sorts of topics. I really hope you'll join me. We're going to be starting Thursday, June 22nd on this channel. So hopefully you can set your calendars to that and join me as we deep dive into all these different sports leagues. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Excellent. There you have it, folks. AWS On Air Sports, June 22nd, right here on this channel. Make sure you hit that follow button so you get the notification when it goes live, and set those reminders on your calendar.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Lorenzo. I appreciate you.
Absolutely, Nick. It was a pleasure. I appreciate you hopping on today and helping me out.
All right. See you, everybody.
All right. Take care. All right, folks. So we got about 25 minutes or so left, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper on this AWS compute thing that Mike North was talking about, a little deeper on Spot. So I'm going to bring in a couple of my colleagues, James and Sid, and we're going to chat a little bit more about it. So let me pop them on and let them say hello. James, Sid, welcome to the show. How you guys doing?
Good, man. Is it awesome or what to hear Mike talk about that process? I got to do it in person with him, and he's so full of energy. And as you said, Lorenzo, customer obsessed. Awesome. What an awesome talk.
Absolutely. So I'm super excited. I love, the convergence of technology and in the sports. And so I'm glad you guys are on with me today to kind of, dive a little bit deeper on the tech that Mike kind of talked about and kind of spin it out and maybe educate the audience a little bit on some of these things we've talked about a little bit more. So, with time being limited, I want to jump right in with you guys. And so when we talk about, before we kind of dive too far into details, James, can you tell the audience exactly what Spot is and how it works? I know Mike talked about it a little bit, but can you give the audience just a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So for us, EC2 is general compute, right? And we've got all the different shapes, sizes, and flavors of compute that meet whatever our customer needs. So we build for all of our customers' peaks. And so that means at any point in time, we have spare capacity. So what EC2 Spot instances is making that spare capacity available to our customers so they can infuse it into their workloads. Whenever we have excess, that excess is available. We make it available at a discounted price so customers can take advantage of that. And I think Mike did a great job of characterizing how they use it.
Excellent. And that's kind of the big thing there, folks, right? It's spare capacity. You get it at a discount. As Mike talked about, it allows you to deliver scale that might otherwise be cost prohibitive, right? When he looked at the schedule, looked at how much compute they were going to need, and found out that he could not only get the scale he was looking for, but at a much better price, right? It opens up just a ton of different opportunities, a lot more innovation. So definitely kind of love that. So kind of pivoting a little bit, Sid, and kind of bringing that down a little bit. So we got Spot instances. They're just spare capacity that we build out to kind of support our on-demand customers. And when we have that SS capacity, we make it available at a discount. Now, personally, I'm a fan of just getting the early questions out of the way when customers talk about Spot and they hear about Spot. And the primary thing that customers are always concerned about is the fact that those instances can be interrupted. Can you talk a little bit about how the interruption process actually works on Spot and how rarely interruptions actually happen and things that customers can do to mitigate that, just like Mike talked about?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Lorenzo. So as you and James were saying, Spot is excess capacity, so it can be reclaimed by AWS when the demand changes. And when that actually happens, EC2 or AWS will let you know in two ways. The first is a 2-minute interruption notice, which lets you know that you will lose access to the instance within 2 minutes or it'll be reclaimed. And the second is a little bit more of a pre-warning. It happened for some reclaiming instances, but not for all of them. And it's called a rebalance notification. And this just indicates that your instance is at a higher risk of interruption in the future. And this is a little bit more, as I was saying, of an advance warning. This may sound a little bit risky for production workload, but with automation available today, customers take advantage of both the rebalance recommendation and the full 2-minute interruption notice to checkpoint their data, transition jobs, and maintain their capacity targets by replacing their instances with deeper capacity pools. And this isn't something that happens all the time. I'd say majority of workloads are able to run without interruptions, but it is something to be prepared for.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of, dovetails perfectly into my kind of next question for James and talking about, right? So, we understand that these interruptions can potentially happen, but, that's not something that we necessarily got to panic about. It's a known variable and we can kind of plan for it. And so, James, can you talk a little bit about at a high level, the actions that customers can take to both mitigate interruptions and on the rare occasion that they actually do happen, what are the customer's options for handling those interruptions? I think you're muted there, James. We're doing it live, people.
Sorry, brother. I got too many buttons. Software muted myself. So when we talk about starting with the initial instances and pools that people pick and choose from, a lot of customers kind of design it, almost go back to what Mike North was saying on I started with these computers, and then those computers I knew I could run this on. And so you map that over to instances. Well, at AWS now, we have 600 plus instances and counting, right? That's a lot for anybody to keep track of. So when you think about asking customers to kind of run through and know the differences of all those instances and how they can shape them, what they can choose them, it's too much, right? Everybody still picks the 2 or 3 they're comfortable with, and they try to build based on that. So we spent a lot of time building ways to make this easier for customers. And attribute-based instance selection is one of those features that we developed for this, where customers can just give us the attributes in terms of CPU or memory allocation that your job and workload needs, and then let AWS do the heavy lifting to go pick those instances for you. So this is an easier way for customers to say, I don't need to know all of them. I just need to know what my workload needs. And then based on that, I'll let you pick the instances. And for us, that creates a very diverse family of instances to work from when you're thinking about spot capacity pools. And we say this all this time on our team, like diversity and flexibility of instances is key to your success. So pulling that big diverse set of instances through attribute-based instance selection, you now want to know, well, how are you going to select them for me? Select me the best instances that help me run my business. So price capacity optimization is a long way of saying we've created an allocation strategy for our customers too, that it makes it easy by picking the lowest price instance in the deepest pool of capacity. So once you give me that big list of instances, I'm going to help narrow that down at runtime to the ones that are going to best suit your needs, lower your risk of interruption at the best possible price.
Absolutely. And like, to James's point, right, attribute-based instance selection, is one of the favorite features that we've released, I think, in the last year or so, because it really, customers that can leverage it, you really get into an instance agnostic perspective in terms of your compute inside of your organization, right? You set up those attributes, you set up an attribute profile for your workload, and effectively know that any instance that is pulled in based on that profile that you set will meet your requirements, right? You don't care if it's a C, a M, or R, because you know that it basically meets your minimum baseline. And so what that allows you to do, we kind of say is instance diversification, right? So it allows you to, from a spot perspective in particular, to just get into tons of additional capacity that you might otherwise not really be thinking about because of the combinations and permutations that are out there. And then to James's point, allocation strategies, right? And so from a spot perspective, allocation strategies determine kind of how the compute is acquired, right? It's kind of the top line guidance for how your compute will be acquired. And to his point, price capacity optimized is our newest allocation strategy and our recommended allocation strategy. And effectively what it's going to do is going to go and look out for the deepest pools of spot capacity, right? I.e. the ones that are going to have the least likelihood of being interrupted, right? Because we want to keep those interruptions to a minimum. And then it's going to say, okay, I found the deepest pool. Now find me the lowest cost instances inside of those deepest pools, right? So it is an iteration on our previous capacity optimized allocation strategy, but now with price awareness, right? That was feedback from our customers. That's a big thing we say here, right? Is like 95% of our features come from customer feedback. And that was one of them. Customers said, hey, capacity optimized is great, but we like price awareness. And so now you have with price capacity optimized allocation strategy, you have both that price awareness as well as kind of that target on capacity, which I love. So just lots of ways that customers can, minimize their potential for interruption. And then if it does occur, do smart things from there. So Sid, now that we know what spot is and how interruptions actually work, can you talk about spot versus our other pricing options and when customers should use one or the other?
For sure. And so when we talk to customers, we typically recommend that everybody have a pricing strategy for compute because it typically tends to be one of the largest costs that customers have in the cloud. And so along these lines, we have three pricing mechanisms when you buy compute. The first is on demand. It's where we see customers typically start. There's no discounts available. You're running it. You're being charged on an hourly basis. The second one is savings plans, where you're making an hourly commitment to AWS to spend a certain amount on EC2 for either 1 or 3 years, and you're basically making a longer term commitment. And the third, as we're talking about, is spot, where you're getting access to the largest discounts you can get on EC2 in return for some of the reclamation that we were talking about earlier. And what we like to tell customers is use the best tool for the job. So what I like to say is if you have fault tolerant or stateless workloads, they're probably more ideal for Spot, things that can be interrupted or can handle those interruptions. And that's a great way to get the biggest savings or the biggest discounts you can possibly get on AWS EC2. And ideal workloads for this typically are things like containerized workloads, big data, CI/CD, as well as a variety of other ones that can handle interruption. And then from there, look at your compute usage and kind of try and identify workloads that are running maybe 24/7 or need access to that steady usage or steady compute. And that's where we recommend something like a longer-term compute savings plan. It could either be 1 or 3 years. The longer the commitment, the better the discount. And workloads that typically have ideal sets of patterns or consistently running are typically good workloads for a compute savings plan.
Absolutely. That kind of is kind of a lot of points there. One of the things that Mike was kind of talking about that I kind of keyed in on earlier when he was talking about one of the things that AWS had worked with the NFL on was about whether to pick smaller instances or bigger instances, right? And here we call that kind of instance right sizing, right? Making sure that we have the appropriately sized instance for the workload. So a lot of times, right, if you're coming out of a traditional IT environment, like a data center, right, we just bought a bunch of big honking boxes, right, and they were probably underutilized. But it was so cumbersome to get them in the first place, right? That's the way we kind of did it. But in cloud, it's a kind of different philosophy. And so from an instance right sizing perspective, we generally advise customers to kind of, don't go vertical, right? Horizontal. Right. So you're able to, take an instance of a reasonable size, evaluate it. And then if it is proving that it is under provision, you're able to swap over to a larger instance. And if it's over provision, you can kind of move down a level. Right. So that right sizing and finding kind of the right spot for it. And so Sid, the point that you kind of made about purchasing options, right? So on demand, savings plan, Spot, it makes a lot of sense. And really what it is a matter of kind of finding the right purchasing option for the right workload. I think the big thing that I always would like to highlight at this point is that when it comes to purchasing options, right, on demand, savings plan, Spot, it's not an either or decision, it's an and decision, right? You can use all of those purchasing options together in a single workload if it makes sense. And so we have customers that use all of those based on their needs, and they use them to great effect. James, can you talk a little bit about what other benefits the NFL sees besides cost optimization and savings?
Yeah, so I think Mike touched on this a little bit, and I want to bring some of that back in the discussion. There are things they couldn't do when it took them 10 weeks to get to schedule one, right? So iterate fast, learn stuff, break things, and then figure out what you like about that schedule and then how you want to keep that and how you want to move it forward. So if you were trying to do this in your own data center or on-prem, like he was talking about all the different computers and worried about whether the fan was going to have a heating issue, that really disrupts the business. As you said, don't think of this as a business disruption. But if I can have this access to scale and ask extra clusters questions because I've spun up so many Spot instances in different clusters, I have the ability to do things and ask questions that weren't cost effective to do before. So planning it in my own data center would mean how many weeks of the year would they have massive excess capacity? So it does like a multi-factor thing in that you can really think of the ability to innovate by adding more compute to it, get 2 or 3 times more the asks because of the capacity you have access to. And then that opens up the doors for innovation that wouldn't be there otherwise. And I think for somebody like the NFL, that became really, really prominent in their ability to kind of move through this. Once we dialed in on the types of instances and size and shapes of them, and then the amount of scale that we could bring, that unlocked them to ask questions that he didn't think he would be able to do for years to come. And I think Mike's asking new questions now about what other things could I start to do because of those lessons learned. So one type of innovation feeds another type of innovation, and access to scale like this where it fits in your budget means you can ask those questions without having to get called into somebody's office to apologize for the cost of your computing resources.
Absolutely, James. And I really kind of love that, right? That the freedom that it unlocks for customers to really innovate and try new things, right? And kind of just to his point about what they're going to do in the future, right? That predictive analytics, right? That predictive, to be able to give them kind of more insight into the best decisions to make in the future. And I really love that because, like you said, years ago, it just was impossible. It was completely impossible in terms of a thought that, hey, this is something that we could potentially do. But now that they, have access to all these kind of capabilities, they're able to evaluate, just a order of magnitude more possibilities and scenarios. And I think the result is that, we all get better football, which I think everybody in the chat and everybody watching is all for.
Yeah, I really like what he said in there. Like, I have this thing, and I don't know if it's a great thing or not, and I don't know if it's like a terrible thing, but I can spin up a cluster and ask it more about that thing and see what it translates to. And that's access to thinking broader and challenging things he wouldn't have done if it was in his own data center, or he was handcuffed to the amount of compute resources he could put at it, solving those problems. So that to me is amazing.
Absolutely. I know that office was getting hot with all those big computers in there. All right. So we kind of laid out the framework around Spot. Let's dig a little bit deeper. So around here, we always say that flexibility is key to successful Spot adoption. James, can you talk to the audience about the kinds of flexibility we mean, what each of them is, and why they are so important to successful Spot adoption?
Yeah, so when you think of all the instances we have at AWS, and when you think about how we would naturally kind of group them into pools of capacity, it becomes really important to understand how you would diversify across pools of capacity. So when you have an ideal instance, this is a type, size, region, availability zone, that specific pool of capacity, I know matches my workload and I can run on it. So we like to tell customers, okay, think about that. That's a known, right? So now how do I think about it in terms of, well, what about larger sizes or smaller sizes? What about a generation backwards from where you are today? Each one of those things is an extra pool of capacity that you're adding to the possibility of compute. And so once you're in that, then we kind of say, well, what about across other families? You said it earlier, Lorenzo, CMs and Rs. Like if you have one, you probably love all three, right? You can meet your requirements by adding those in. So think about sizes, generations, think about families that you're crossing over to. Think about the availability zones you run in. Every one of those things gives you a dimension of capacity that you're able to start to take advantage of. Lastly, think about regions. Do I want to expand and run this across multiple different regions? The amount of capacity we have, you can tap into by going from each one of those dimensions in your capacity pool.
Love it. Love kind of just all the flexibility. And so kind of spinning that around, Sid, for customers who are looking to increase their flexibility, can you recommend some AWS services to help them get started?
Absolutely. So as customers have begun to really adopt Spot large scale, we've been working on a variety of services, not only with Spot, but with overall compute to help them increase their flexibility. The first is Compute Optimizer, which is a service in AWS, which allows customers to optimize their usage and ensure that they're getting the full capabilities of the EC2 instances that they do have and are able to use all of the compute that they have access to. The second one is attribute-based instance selection, as James was mentioning. Being able to find similar instance types to the ones you're already running is, I think, something that a lot of customers are benefiting from, and I think there's a lot of potential for it moving forward. And the last one that I really want to highlight is called the Spot Placement Score. You can find this right in the console or via CLI. But really what it does is it allows you to find, put in your requirements, whether that be certain attributes or certain instance types and the capacity that you need, and it'll provide a score of 1 to 10 of the likelihood of the capacity you're going to get at the time that you make the request. So it's just a good way to understand if you have certain requirements, whether you'll be able to get that capacity on Spot, whether you'll have to diversify across more instance types, whether you're good to go, and it's just a good tool to have. And I think we're going to be posting a link in the chat about a blog we have about how to use it better and an open source tool that we have to kind of not only run it, but to track it a little bit better.
Absolutely. I mean, I love all the tools. Spot placement score is a very powerful capability. And, just kind of from an inside perspective, one of the ways that we see spot placement score being used to great effect is with EMR workloads, right? So customers are able to kind of lay out the profile of the workload and get that attribute, get that placement score back to let them know which AZ, because you can get either region level or AZ level spot placement score recommendations. And so it helps them to identify the optimal availability zone, AZ or availability zone, to stand up that EMR cluster to give them the highest kind of likelihood of successfully being able to execute that workload. So if you got any EMR workloads, spot placement score and spot placement score tracker is absolutely something I recommend checking out. It definitely has a tremendous amount of value for those type of workloads, as well as any other workload where you want to make sure that you're establishing that workload in the best place possible from a spot perspective to try to give you the best opportunity to get the capacity that you're looking for. Now, as we come down to the end of the show, this is a couple of kind of amazing facts that we have when it comes to some of the things that we've talked about here today, right? So since 2015, EC2 spot instances have helped customers save over $8 billion with a B, right? So not only are customers scaling to ridiculous scale, but $8 billion, that is no chump change. Compute Optimizer that Sid talked about, it generates recommendations for over 80% of EC2 usage. Since the launch of savings plans back in 2019, customers have saved over $15 billion, which again is even better. And Compute Optimizer has provided in that time since December 2019 over 10 billion recommendations. So if you're on AWS, Compute Optimizer is absolutely something that can provide value for you, give you insight into ways to help you optimize your workloads, both from a cost perspective, from a right sizing perspective. It just has a ton of different value there. And of course, savings plans, if that is appropriate for your workloads, provides, as you can see from that $15 billion saved since 2019, provides a substantial opportunity to save costs. And that's something that we're always looking to help our customers do here. So with that said, I think we're coming down to the end of the show. I'd like to thank my guest again, Mike North, NFL VP for Broadcast Planning, as well as my co-host, Nick, James and Sid here for joining me today. Don't forget to join us next time on Under the Hood with AWS Compute, the show that takes you behind the scenes to understand how AWS services and solutions drive great outcomes everywhere from media and entertainment to technology. Make sure that you tune in next week. We're talking cloud econ. We're kind of further digging down the rabbit hole on that, helping our customers to continue to optimize around cost. So make sure that you kind of mark that on your calendar and join us next week for that. As always, I'm your host, Lorenzo Winfrey. See you next time. And remember, everybody, go be great. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in.